Thank you, Lauren, for joining me today on the podcast. We are talking about, where to start? Trade issues. We have an election going on here in Canada. So, needless to say, you are very busy at Seeds Canada, to put it mildly. I'm sure that's probably like the understatement of the year, I'm thinking.
Yep, we're going 24/7. If I'm not at my computer, my brain is going, continuing to work through everything.
Well, unlike other areas of the agriculture industry, the seed industry is, I guess, somewhat insulated from a lot of what's going on with some of these trade issues that we're dealing with, tariffs, etc. As most seed grown in Canada doesn't really go over the border, right? That said, over $500 million in Canadian seed is exported to the United States every year, I believe, and roughly the same amount of American seed is imported into Canada each year. And so the seed sector is affected to some extent by this. And I'm just curious, like what you've heard from Seeds Canada members in terms of the challenges they're facing as we deal with some of the uncertainties around trade and some of the other economic stuff that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, so it is true that most of the seed Canada produces domestically is used domestically. But as you said, there is $500 billion of million with an M of seed moving from Canada to the US, and roughly the same amount moving from the US to Canada. So that right away shows we are very balanced and we are very complementary and integrated. We don't have these deficits that President Trump has been talking about in terms of seed trade. So, although Canada produces most of the seed it uses domestically and uses most of the seed that it produces, there are some seed classes where we rely entirely on international trade. So vegetable and garden seed is a great example. We source virtually 100% of our garden seed from foreign jurisdictions. So whether it's from the US or it may be from beyond the US and it's moving through the US with or without additional processing in the US, which will influence the HS code, or what ultimately influences the tariff. So that is certainly an issue, and that's not only seed that would go to the home gardener sold at Canadian Tire or a garden center, but that's also seed that goes to greenhouses and is used to produce produce for Canadians in Canada. So that piece definitely has a huge impact when there's tariffs at play. But what we also see is seed that is moving back and forth across the border as needed. So some companies, whether they're Canadian or multinational, may break up their production and produce in various regions north and south of the border. And that helps to balance the risk to make sure that they do get a seed crop with a high enough quality to sell to farmers. And, when we have tariffs at play, seed companies have to start to rethink that. How are they going to balance that risk if they can't move seed freely across the border? We also see contra-season nursery production, whether it's in the US or whether it's south of the US and moving through the US. It could be packaged, it could be treated or conditioned or whatnot in the US, which again could influence whether or not a tariff is applied at the border. So there are a lot of intricacies that are at play. So while the actual amount of seed trade may not seem significant, a single seed could move back and forth across the border a number of times. And how many times is a tariff added to that? I would say the uncertainty is also huge for the seed industry. And I think it's a psychological menace for everyone, not knowing what's going to happen. Right now, if your product seed complies or is within the CUSMA or USMCA arrangement, and you can prove that it's Canadian origin, we're not subject to tariffs moving into the U.S. for now. We don't know what's going to happen. We suspect April 2nd is going to be the next day where we hear something, and that could all change. So I think that's really interrupting seed movement and production. So that's a significant concern.
Yeah, like you say, things can change very quickly in this current climate that we're in, and this really affects the whole value chain. It's not just seed, and in fact, Seeds Canada recently got on board with the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, or CAFTA for short, as what's called a friend of CAFTA. And I'm just curious why Seeds Canada. This is the first time you've partnered with CAFTA, and why you decided to do that, and why now, and then what that partnership is yielding for you.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one thing here. You mentioned the entire value chain. Yes, so seed is the start of that value chain. So, even if you think, well, seed is relatively insulated, farmers' decision to purchase seed and what type of seed to purchase is going to be based on what they are able to market. So we feel those secondary impacts of any changes to market access for commodities. So I think that's a big piece too, and that also influenced why we decided to join CAFTA. CAFTA has a history of working across various ag sectors to advocate for free trade, which is the ideal, right? That's, I think, all of our members enjoy the current or the previous, I guess, not current, free trade situation that we had with the US and other partners. And CAFTA for a long time has done a lot of heavy lifting in that file. And I think especially right now, it's their time to shine. And like any association, CAFTA needs resources to be able to continue their advocacy. So just like Seeds Canada, for me to continue to do our work, we need to make sure that members recognize the value of what we provide and are willing to become members to allow us to not only continue the work we're doing, but to expand our footprint. So our membership in CAFTA is in part a recognition of the hard work that they do that does benefit the seed sector. Absolutely. And so we wanted to make sure that we did our small part to ensure that they have the resources to continue to work, especially during this time. It also gives us, a door to a lot of conversations that we hadn't been a part of before, to make sure that we're able to give our members the best advice, to make sure that we're able to develop strategy for the seed sector. So I think it's really a win-win, and it's recognition that there's a body, an association doing this work, and they need to have the resources to do the work. And if you appreciate what they do, you contribute to that work.
No, that's a very good point, especially, as we head into an election now, which is the other big piece of news that has broken in Canada in recent days. At the end of April will be our election day. And that brings to mind for me something that people have been working towards for a lot of years, and that's seed regulatory modernization, or SRM for short. And people who read Seed World Canada have read a lot about this, but for people tuning in from maybe the United States, just to update them, SRM is an initiative spearheaded by our federal government to modernize Canada's seeds regulations. Now, come the end of April, we will have a new government. And I don't have to tell you, Lauren, that every government has different priorities when it comes to the initiatives set in motion by previous governments. So what are your top concerns when it comes to the SRM file in light of the election that we're in right now?
So, this has been a long process. Just looking at the calendar in the bottom of my computer screen, it's 2025. We've been going at this since 2020, and even before that, there was some work being done. So it is there's been a lot of resources invested into this process. And where we're at right now, CFIA had promised to release a policy document which would outline many of the recommended amendments to the regulations that were based on, the task team process as well as public consultations. So they said that they would do that during the spring. Um, you know, Government spring is not the first day of spring, whatever that is, March 23rd or whatnot. So we did anticipate if there was going to be an election called immediately after the liberal leadership race concluded, then we probably were not going to get that document in the spring. And so that's exactly where we are. So the government will move into a caretaker convention with the writ dropping. During that convention, there's many things that they avoid doing, and they don't roll out new policy and they don't do public consultations. So we will not be seeing that policy document released during this time, unless they deviate from tradition. So usually it's when the new government is actually in force and cabinet members are sworn in. So realistically, we're looking at mid-May at earliest for that document to be released, if it is released, and then there will be the public consultation. And I say if it will be released because, as you mentioned, every government has their own priorities. And if we have a liberal government or coalition government that includes the liberals, I think, I would assume that we would carry on with SRM as usual. However, we are seeing some resources being moved around. We had some announcements about CFIA red tape, et cetera, before the election was called. If we have a conservative government, then I think all bets are off, to be honest. We don't know what types of changes they're going to make right out the gate. And that could really influence what they're looking at doing with regards to SRM. Now, Seeds Canada has been very vocal and transparent regarding our feelings about the SRM process. There's been a lot of recommendations that have been fairly minor, minor neutral or minor positive. There's been a few more significant positive things, but there's also been some recommendations come out of the process that, the seed sector feels will set the sector back. And the goal of this process was to modernize. The entire SRM consultation process was not set up to modernize the system. It wasn't set up to reach its goal. So, has it hit its mark? No, I don't see how it's going to hit its goal of modernization.
Yeah.
Would we be upset if some of those negative recommendations or recommendations that are not going to modernize the system and are actually going to, put us back, are lost, are a victim of the election? No, but we still do need to modernize. We are still working with a very outdated framework. So if the SRM process does not continue, how do we ensure that we do get the modernization that we need? When are we going to get another process? So, Seeds Canada will be working on strategy to make sure that we promote those changes that were recommended out of the process that are positive, things like incorporation by reference. But we'll also continue to recommend and advocate for an advisory body that is inclusive based of the industry that can work with the CFIA to make those further changes that we need to modernize and to allow for continuous improvement. So it will be interesting to see what happens. I would hate to say we spent 5 years on this and got nothing in return. So obviously we'll be working to make sure that our members do see some benefit, but certainly it wasn't the process that we needed it to be.
Yeah, like you say, lots to come yet, lots to be determined. So we will see where it all goes. But before I let you go, to end on a hopeful note, I'm curious in your opinion what the biggest strength is of our of our country, of our system, in sort of weathering this current storm that everyone's facing? What's that one big thing that Canadian agriculture has going for it at the moment?
I think it's a really tough time for agriculture. And I think, a lot of people are, especially in the West, where I am based, are feeling a bit left out on an island. But I think, agriculture as a whole, we've seen tough times. And maybe not, people of my generation, but, certainly we have people in the industry who have seen times like these. And we are an incredibly resilient industry. We make things work, and we come together and we rally when times are tough. So I've already seen that happening on even on micro scales where I'm getting to talk to people within our membership who I would have never maybe talked to before. Building relationships with government relations and various advocacy professionals throughout the sector right now. So we're coming together, we're forming alliances, and ultimately that's going to strengthen us in the future. So I do see that as a big positive. Don't waste a crisis. And I think one beautiful thing that you can get out of a crisis is that is that building of relationships. And I think the new generation calls that trauma bonding. But it is really important, and it shouldn't be downplayed the value that can bring in the future.
Yeah, like the song says, "Come together." That's an important sentiment, I think, to focus on our similarities, what we all have in common with our partners here at home and abroad, for sure. So, no,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Lauren. It was great to talk with you.
Thanks, Mark. It's always a pleasure.